The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming a somber rhythm against my office window. It was well past midnight in this concrete jungle we call a city, and the neon signs reflecting off the wet pavement were a constant reminder of the long night ahead. My desk was littered with case files, each one a story of digital malfeasance waiting to be unraveled. Tonight I was diving deep into the underworld of cybersecurity, where every exploit was a crime scene, every vulnerability a lead worth pursuing. I cracked open the first file marked with a bright red tab. This was CVE 2026-4106. It was a medium severity case with a CVSS score of 5.3 and an EPSS probability of just 1%. But even small-time crooks can cause real damage. The target was the HT Mega add-ons for Elementor WordPress plugin, a seemingly harmless tool now caught up in a nasty bit of business. The developers had left an unauthenticated AJAX action exposed, one that could be used to extract sensitive user data. Attackers could send a specially crafted request to the vulnerable endpoint, bypassing any authentication checks, and retrieve information like full names, cities, states, and countries of customers who placed orders in the last week. That's personal, private data, the kind that could be used for identity theft or worse. For remediation, I had to act fast. Upgrade the plugin to version 3.0.7 or later immediately. If that wasn't possible, disable the AJAX functionality altogether and monitor for any unauthorized access attempts in the logs. This was a job for the sysadmins and security teams, and they needed to be on high alert. One misstep, and this could turn into a full-blown data breach. But that wasn't the only body on the slab tonight. Next up was CVE 2026-33076. This one was a high severity case with a CVSS score of 8.9 and an EPSS probability of 0%, meaning it was unlikely to be exploited, but its potential impact was devastating. The victim here was Roxy-WI, a web interface used to manage Proxy, Nginx, Apache, and keep-a-lived servers. The vulnerability lay in the Proxy section save interface, which presented a path traversal weakness. An attacker could send a malicious request, crafting a file name that would trick the system into writing to a directory outside the intended one. This could allow the attacker to write arbitrary files, including scheduled tasks, leading to remote code execution. The technical mechanism was straightforward but deadly. An unauthenticated attacker could send a post request to the Proxy section save endpoint, specifying a file name with directory traversal sequences like cron D. The system would process this request without proper validation, writing the malicious content to a critical directory. Once that task was executed, the attacker would gain remote code execution, effectively taking control of the server. The scope was wide, as Roxy-WI was used by many organizations to manage their critical infrastructure. An attacker could use this to deploy ransomware, steal sensitive data, or disrupt services entirely. For remediation, the fix was clear. Upgrade to version 8.2.6.4 or later immediately. If patching wasn't possible, restrict access to the Proxy section, save endpoint, and monitor the cron.d directory for unauthorized changes. Sysadmins and security teams needed to act swiftly. This was a critical vulnerability that could bring down entire networks if left unaddressed. I barely had time to light another cigarette when the next file landed on my desk. CVE 2026-41247, another high-severity case with a CVSS score of 8.9 and an EPSS probability of 0%. The target was LFinder, an open-source file manager for web applications. The vulnerability was a command injection flaw in the resize command, specifically in how it handled the BG parameter for background color. An attacker could craft a malicious request, injecting arbitrary commands into that parameter. When the resize or rotate processing occurred, those commands would be executed with the privileges of the web server. The attack chain was insidious. An attacker would send a post request to the ELFinder connector, specifying the resize command and a background color value containing command injection payloads like bin bash c wami. The system would process this request, unaware of the malicious intent hidden in the seemingly innocuous parameter. Once executed, the attacker would gain remote code execution, allowing them to run commands, access files, or even take full control of the server. Given L-Finder's widespread use in web applications, the potential impact was enormous, ranging from data theft to complete system compromise. Remediation required immediate action. Upgrade L-Finder to version 2.1.67 or later. If patching wasn't feasible, disable the resize functionality, or implement strict input validation for the BG parameter. Security teams needed to be vigilant, monitoring logs for unusual activity and unauthorized access attempts. This was a vulnerability that could turn a simple file manager into a gateway for digital destruction. The night was far from over, but the last case was perhaps the most concerning. CVE-2026-41138, another high-severity vulnerability with a CVSS score of 8.3 and an EPSS probability of 0%. The target was FlowEyes, a drag-and-drop user interface for building custom large language model flows. The vulnerability lay in the airtableagent.es component, where there was a lack of input verification when using pandas. An attacker could craft a malicious request, injecting arbitrary Python code into the question parameter. When this code was processed by pandas, it would be executed, leading to remote code execution. The technical mechanism was a classic injection attack. An attacker would send a post request to the FlowEyes API endpoint, specifying the question parameter with malicious Python code. The system would process this request without proper validation, passing the input directly to pandas for execution. With the ability to run arbitrary code, the attacker could steal data, modify system settings, or even take full control of the server. Given FlowEyes' role in building and managing large language models, the potential impact was immense, potentially allowing attackers to manipulate AI behavior or exfiltrate sensitive training data. For remediation, the solution was straightforward. Upgrade FlowEyes to version 3.1.0 or later immediately. If patching wasn't possible, implement strict input validation for the question parameter and monitor for unusual activity. Developers and security teams needed to work together to patch this vulnerability and ensure that user input was always treated as untrusted. This was a case where the line between user input and system control was dangerously blurred, and it needed to be addressed before it turned into a full-blown crisis. As I closed the last file, I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the city outside my window, a constant reminder of the digital battles being fought every day. Tonight's cases were a stark reminder that in the world of cybersecurity, the stakes were always high and the threats were constantly evolving. But with vigilance, expertise, and a little bit of that old gumshoe spirit, we could stay one step ahead of the digital criminals. This is Jack Cipher, signing off. Remember, in the dark alleys of the internet, it's not just your data that's at risk. It's your trust, your privacy, and sometimes your very way of life. Stay sharp out there and keep those patches coming.